bit, as usual. There's people to jump on. I might actually move. We got the Mevo moved to a different place right now, but I think I'm going to move it back. Almost get a better angle this way, because like when I look up, I was just noticing this. We moved it back further when the Christmas tree was here, because the Christmas tree blocked it from where it was over here. You get basically the same picture, but an advantage is that you get, when I look up, I'm kind of looking right at it right here, whereas here I kept having to like turn over to the side. So yeah, this is the Mevo that we use. I can kind of like pan around like this, see, play with it. Anyway, good morning to whoever is there. We're going to pick up in Exodus today. We went through chapters 8 and 9 last time, so we're picking up today with chapter 10 and the last 3 of the plagues, including the Passover. So Exodus chapter 10, verses 1 through 11. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go into Pharaoh, for I have hardened his heart and the hearts of his servants, that I may show these signs of mine among them, and that you may tell in the hearing of your son and of your grandson how I have dealt harshly with the Egyptians, and what signs I have done among them, so that you may know that I am the Lord." So Moses and Aaron went in to Pharaoh and said to him, "Thus says the Lord, the God of the Hebrews, how long will you refuse to humble yourself before me? Let my people go, that they may serve me. For if you refuse to let my people go, behold, tomorrow I will bring locusts into your country, and they shall cover the face of the land, so that no one can see the land. And they shall eat what is left to you after the hail, and they shall eat every tree of yours that grows in the field, and they shall fill your houses and the houses of all your servants and of all the Egyptians, as neither your fathers nor your grandfathers have seen, from the day they came on earth to this day." Then he turned and went out from Pharaoh. And then Pharaoh's servants said to him, "How long shall this man be a snare to us? Let the men go, that they may serve the Lord their God. Do you not yet understand that Egypt is ruined?" So Moses and Aaron were brought back to Pharaoh, and he said to them, "Go serve the Lord your God. But which ones are to go?" Moses said, "We will go with our young and our old. We will go with our sons and daughters, and with our flocks and herds, for we must hold a fast to the Lord." But he said to them, "The Lord be with you. If ever I let you and your little ones go, look, you have some evil purpose in mind. No. Go, the men among you, and serve the Lord, for that is what you are asking." And they were driven out from Pharaoh's presence. Locusts are, of course, incredibly destructive. I remember reading a description of such a cloud of locusts. It was, back a long time ago, there were locust swarms like this in America. I'm not entirely sure. I think they got killed off by, pesticides or something, right? But there's a description of one like that in Laura Ingalls Wilder, and I read another description of one that it was 90 miles wide and 500 miles long, a cloud of locusts. So thick that it blacks out the sun. Imagine that. That's incredible. And God is saying that this form of locust is going to be way worse than anything the Egyptians had ever seen. And what's so destructive about these locusts is, first, they come in, right, and they eat up all the food. But then they also lay their eggs. So they eat the food, they lay their eggs, they leave. Then, a little while later, after some more food starts sprouting up, the eggs hatch, and they eat that. And then they fly away. So it's just economically devastating, right? And this is the worst economic devastation so far. And this is kind of like the nail in the coffin, right? Because it mentioned before that the hail had destroyed the barley and the flax or whatever, but not the wheat, because the wheat hadn't yet sprung up. The wheat is the main thing for the Egyptians. Food-wise, it's largely about grain. You remember, with the story of Joseph, right? I mean, he's storing all that grain, etc. Interesting note, I read somewhere that, you think of Egyptians, you think of cats, right? They love cats. And the reason for that is all the grain. All this grain being stored, mice are trying to get in there and eat it, so they kept a lot of cats in order to kill the mice. Anyway, this is an attack right upon the last really main food source that's left outstanding. It's going to absolutely destroy it. They're going to have nothing left. And Pharaoh's servants realize this when Moses predicts this plague, and they beg Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. So Pharaoh tries to barter. He's like, well, only the men can go. Not going to work. Verses 12 through 20, chapter 10. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand over the land of Egypt for the locusts, so that they may come upon the land of Egypt and eat every plant in the land, all that the hail has left. So Moses stretched out his staff over the land of Egypt, and the Lord brought an east wind upon the land all that day and all that night. When it was morning, the east wind had brought the locusts. The locusts came up over all the land of Egypt and settled on the whole country of Egypt. Such a dense swarm of locusts as had never been before, nor ever will be again. They covered the whole face of the land, so that the land was darkened, and they ate all the plants in the land and all the fruit of the trees that the hail had left. Not a green thing remained, neither tree nor plant of the field, through all the land of Egypt. Then Pharaoh hastily called Moses and Aaron and said, I have sinned against the Lord your God and against you. Now therefore forgive my sin, please, only this once, and plead with the Lord your God, only to remove this death from me. So he went out from Pharaoh and pleaded with the Lord. And the Lord turned the wind to a very strong west wind, which lifted the locusts and drove them into the Red Sea. Not a single locust was left in the country of Egypt. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people of Israel go. So Pharaoh, repents. But it's obviously fake, right? This isn't, I'm sorry because I did it. It's, I'm sorry because I'm in trouble kind of thing. And the destruction has already happened, too. It's too late. God warned him. And he refused to repent and let them go before. And now after, everything's been eaten, right? Like a whole lot of good that does you at this point. Notice also how when the Lord gets rid of the locusts, it says he sweeps them into the Red Sea. I think that's intentional foreshadowing, because that is, of course, exactly what he's going to do to Pharaoh and his army as well. Note here also, we've been tracking the different gods that God is showing his power over. Seth is the Egyptian god of storms and disorder. And these locusts come like a storm, like a thick cloud. That's what one person wrote is the one that's being attacked here. Verses 21 to 29, the ninth plague. Then the Lord said to Moses, stretch out your hand toward heaven, that there may be darkness over the land of Egypt, a darkness to be felt. So Moses stretched out his hand toward heaven, and there was pitch darkness in all the land of Egypt 3 days. They did not see one another, nor did anyone rise from his place for 3 days. But all the people of Israel had light where they lived. Then Pharaoh called Moses and said, go, serve the Lord. Your little ones also may go with you. Only let your flocks and your herds remain behind. Moses said, you must also let us have sacrifices and burnt offerings, that we may sacrifice to the Lord our God. Our livestock also must go with us. Not a hoof shall be left behind, for we must take of them to serve the Lord our God. And we do not know with what we must serve the Lord until we arrive there. But the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he would not let them go. Then Pharaoh said to him, get away from me. Take care never to see my face again, for on the day you see my face you shall die. Moses said, as you say, I will not see your face again. So this last plague is also going to come without warning. Complete darkness. It says a darkness to be felt. You ever felt that? You ever been in a darkness, a pitch black night? So dark you just kind of felt like the darkness was like enveloping you. I don't think any of us have probably ever been anywhere so dark as what's being described here. We live in a world that's like so illuminated, right? There's always light. There's always light somewhere. There's light from the next room, or there's light from the street light, or there's, the reflected light from the city lights down the road, or whatever. There's always some light. There is no light in Egypt. None. Nothing. And this is obviously a direct attack on one of Egypt's biggest gods, Ra, the sun god, right? Boom. Pitch black. And your God can't save you. And they're all stuck in, they can't move, they can't go anywhere or do anything for 3 days because it's so dark. Talk about quarantine, right? So finally, Pharaoh says, go. Children can go too, but not your flocks. He's still trying to bargain, but God will not bargain. He's going to get exactly what he wants, and he's not going to give an inch. So Pharaoh says, don't ever come here again. I'm never going to see you again. And this is the setup for the last and greatest and deadliest of the plagues. All the land of Egypt lies in complete ruin because of Pharaoh's stubborn impenitence. Think how many people will certainly starve and die because of Pharaoh. This is insanely destructive. Man cannot resist God's will or his power. Yet all this God does for his people. In all this, God gets glory over Pharaoh. He makes Pharaoh look small and helpless and stupid, like a foolish child. He makes the gods of Egypt appear to be what they really are, empty, pointless, dumb, as they are all false gods. He makes the devil's power in the magicians to be seen as pathetic. There is absolutely no refusing his power. Yet many still do not believe. They know him, they're terrified of him, but they do not trust in him. That requires only the gospel. Yet, all these works that God is doing, which terrify and ruin the Egyptians, this is gospel to the Israelites, right? Because in all these things he's saving them, where there's darkness in Egypt, there's light in Israel. And all these things that he's doing to Egypt, he's doing in order to rescue his people. His judgments. It reminds me of like Isaiah, where it talks about, behold, your God shall come. With the recompense of God, he will come and save you. Recompense, the judgment, right? He's going to pay people back. But he talks about he will come and save you. Because if God, in God's judgment, this is true of Judgment Day too, right? God's coming on Judgment Day. Well, that's for judgment, right? It's called Judgment Day. But it's our salvation. As Jesus said, when you see these things taking place, lift up your heads, for behold, your redemption is drawing near. Your salvation is here. God's going to take you home. He's going to destroy the devil. He's going to destroy the wickedness of the world. He's going to destroy all evil, all sin. Destroy your sinful nature. He's going to destroy your enemies and save you. So it's bad news for them, good news for you. Chapter 11, verses 1 through 3. The Lord said to Moses, yet one more plague more I will bring upon Pharaoh and upon Egypt. Afterward, he will let you go from here. When he lets you go, he will drive you away completely. Speak now in the hearing of the people, that they ask every man of his neighbor and every woman of her neighbor for silver and gold jewelry. And the Lord gave the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians. Moreover, the man Moses was very great in the land of Egypt, in the sight of Pharaoh's servants, and in the sight of the people. You might ask, why would people give their neighbors their gold and silver, even if they wanted them to go? Well, because they are in such awe and fear of God's people now. God has made it clear what will happen if they mess with his people. And they're just trying to appease this God. They're just like, if we give them all our stuff, right? Beg them to go away and give them all our stuff, treat them as well as we can, then maybe things will go for you, go better for us. Verses 4 through 10 of chapter 11. So Moses said, thus says the Lord, about midnight I will go out in the midst of Egypt, and every firstborn in the land of Egypt shall die. From the firstborn of Pharaoh who sits on his throne, even to the firstborn of the slave girl who is behind the handmill, and all the firstborn of the cattle. There shall be a great cry throughout all the land of Egypt, such as there has never been, nor ever will be again. But not a dog shall growl against any of the people of Israel, either man or beast, that you may know that the Lord makes a distinction between Egypt and Israel. And all these your servants shall come down to me and bow down to me, saying, get out, you and all the people who follow you. And after that, I will go out. And he went out from Pharaoh in hot anger. Then the Lord said to Moses, Pharaoh will not listen to you, that my wonders may be multiplied in the land of Egypt. Moses and Aaron did all these wonders before Pharaoh, and the Lord hardened Pharaoh's heart, and he did not let the people of Israel go out of his land. This final plague that's threatened will be the worst of all. And think about this from Pharaoh's perspective. Isn't it? His unbelief, his hardened heart is crazy, right? It's an unimaginable level of stubbornness. He has seen all these plagues so far. He can't possibly think, oh, God won't actually go through with it, or God won't actually be able to do it. But what's been threatened here is all the firstborn sons of Egypt dead. Pharaoh's own firstborn son as well. He must know that this is really going to happen. And this final plague too addresses a god of Egypt, because it's going to kill Pharaoh's firstborn son, who will be the next Pharaoh. And the Pharaoh is considered to be a god in Egypt as well. In some ways, the greatest one. Chapter 12, verses 1 through 6. The Lord said to Moses and Aaron in the land of Egypt, This month shall be for you the beginning of months. It shall be the first month of the year for you. Tell all the congregation of Israel that on the 10th day of this month, every man shall take a lamb according to their father's houses, a lamb for a household. And if the household is too small for a lamb, then he and his nearest neighbor shall take according to the number of persons. According to what each can eat, you shall make your count for the lamb. Your lamb shall be without blemish, a male, a year old. You may take it from the sheep or from the goats, and you shall keep it until the 14th day of this month, when the whole assembly of the congregation of Israel shall kill their lambs at twilight. Notice how he says here, this will be the beginning of months for you. This is going to be the beginning of your year, their church year, if you will, but the two are combined for them. Because for the children of Israel, their secular life and their religious life, they're one. There's no difference. They're religious people. They're the people of God. We use the church year for the same purpose, right? I was joking to somebody not that long ago about how January 1st is this completely arbitrary date for the beginning of a new year, right? Like what is it based on, right? It's not based on the new solar year. That would be December 22nd, I guess. Whatever, right? Whatever day it is that we've got the furthest away in the northern hemisphere and we start coming back. It's not lunar anything. That would be weird if we did a lunar year anyway. We'd get all messed up, right? And that's fine. It doesn't matter, right? We can go whenever we want for a secular year. But our church year is intended to be used for the same purpose as it was for the Israelites. This is intended to focus them on God's acts of deliverance. And this is being highlighted. The fact that this month will be the first of months for them, this is being highlighted as the most important event in their history. And indeed, this is the most significant picture of Christ of all the Old Testament feasts. It's not a coincidence that it's this feast during which Christ is actually crucified. And a whole bunch of imagery is being used here for Jesus. So notice, we have a lamb for each household. That's Jesus. He's the lamb for each household. It's a lamb without blemish or spot. We're going to look at some of the quotes a little bit later, but that's Jesus. Chosen on the 10th day, killed on the 14th day. Did you know on Palm Sunday, that's the 10th day of Nisan? And on that day, so people would usually pick a lamb. They'd go to the temple to have the priests approve it. Is this lamb good for Passover? Jesus on the 10th day of Nisan on Palm Sunday rides into Jerusalem. He goes to the temple, looks around, and he leaves. He's the lamb. On the 14th day then of Nisan is when they would kill it. And that's when Jesus was crucified as well. Let's keep going here, verses 7 through 13. Then they shall take some of the blood and put it on the two doorposts and the lintel of the houses in which they eat it. They shall eat the flesh that night, roasted on the fire with unleavened bread and bitter herbs they shall eat it. Do not eat any of it raw or boiled in water, but roasted, its head with its legs and its inner parts. And you shall let none of it remain until the morning. Anything that remains until the morning you shall burn. In this manner you shall eat it, with your belt fastened, your sandals on your feet, and your staff in your hand, and you shall eat it in haste. It is the Lord's Passover. For I will pass through the land of Egypt that night, and I will strike all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both man and beast. And on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. The blood shall be a sign for you on the houses where you are. And when I see the blood, I will pass over you, and no plague will befall you to destroy you when I strike the land of Egypt. And the doorposts, this blood. This is what will protect the Israelites. And of course, it's the same with us. It's the blood of Christ, which is symbolically painted on our hearts through faith. It is his blood which saves us. And notice also the other details about this. They have to eat it all. They have to eat it ready to go because they need to be ready to go. They eat it with bitter herbs and with unleavened bread. And then he says, on all the gods of Egypt, because he's going to execute judgment, because none of them could save the Egyptians from this. None of them could stand up to this God. None of them could keep the angel of death from killing their firstborn sons. Only God could save. The blood of Jesus still saves now. And only the blood of Jesus saves us from God's judgment, from the angel of death. Verses 14 through 20. This day shall be for you a memorial day, and you shall keep it as a feast to the Lord. Throughout your generations, as a statute forever, you shall keep it as a feast. 7 days you shall eat unleavened bread. On the first day you shall remove leaven, that's yeast, out of your houses. For if anyone eats what is leavened from the first day until the seventh day, that person shall be cut off from Israel. On the first day you shall hold a holy assembly, and on the seventh day a holy assembly. No work shall be done on those days, but what everyone needs to eat, that alone may be prepared by you. And you shall observe the feast of unleavened bread, for on this very day I brought your hosts out of the land of Egypt. Therefore you shall observe this day throughout your generations as a statute forever. In the first month, from the 14th day of the month at evening, you shall eat unleavened bread until the 21st day of the month at evening. For 7 days no leaven is to be found in your houses. If anyone eats what is leavened, that person shall be cut off from the congregation of Israel, whether he is a sojourner or a native of the land. You shall eat nothing leavened. In all your dwelling places you shall eat unleavened bread. So notice this is going to be the backdrop for Holy Week too, and everything that's going on with the Passion of Jesus. So the Passover on the 14th is this festival, which also begins, it's the first day of the 7-day feast of unleavened bread. So the Passover is also a day when you do no work. Okay, so it's like a Sabbath. This has some implication. We're not going to get into it right now. It has some implication for dating during Holy Week and some of the references that are made to Sabbaths, etc. But we'll not get into that right now. So God uses this image of the leaven, of this yeast, for both sin and for false doctrine. For instance, in 1 Corinthians, which we'll read again in a little bit, it talks about purging out the old leaven, for you're a new lump, right? The old leaven of yeast, of sin, purging it out of your life. And then in the same section, and in various other sections, he talks about a little leaven leavens the whole lump, and Jesus warns the disciples to beware of the leaven of the Pharisees, the yeast. And what he's saying is, false doctrine is like yeast. You put a little bit of, it'll take a little bit of yeast. You put in that dough, and it spreads throughout the whole thing. It rises. So false doctrine. A little bit of false doctrine, it spreads throughout the group. This is the reason for God's doctrine of concerning church fellowship. This is why he wants us to separate from those who teach even a little bit of false doctrine. Because if we allow a little bit of false doctrine to remain among us, it spreads. And pretty soon it'll grow into more, into more, into more. And the history, the church history shows this big time. You go study it, you go study any church body, you can see when they let a little bit of false doctrine in, and usually the first little bit has to do with church fellowship. They're like, oh, we don't need to worry about that. We don't need to be so restrictive, blah, 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 right? It's okay. It's just a little tiny difference. What difference does it really make? That little bit spreads, and soon there are other false teachings going on. Verses 21 to 28. Let's continue here. Then Moses called all the elders of Israel and said to them, go and select lambs for yourselves according to your clans, and kill the Passover lamb. Take a bunch of hyssop and dip it in the blood that is in the basin, and touch the lintel and the 2 doorposts with the blood that is in the basin. None of you shall go out of the door of his house until the morning, for the Lord will pass through to strike the Egyptians. And when he sees the blood on the lintel and on the 2 doorposts, the Lord will pass over the door and will not allow the destroyer to enter your house to strike you. You shall observe this rite as a statute for you and for your sons forever. And when you come into the land that the Lord will give you, as he has promised, you shall keep this service. And when your children say to you, what do you mean by this service? You will say, it is the sacrifice of the Lord's Passover. For he passed over the houses of the people of Israel in Egypt when he struck the Egyptians, but spared our houses. And the people bowed their heads and worshipped. Then the people of Israel went and did so, as the Lord had commanded Moses and Aaron, so they did. I think that there's maybe a connection here. Notice how it says that they'll use hyssop to paint the blood. And I've always wondered about this. In Psalm 51, David says, purge me with hyssop, and I shall be clean. I wonder if he's making a reference to this, using the hyssop to paint the blood on there. I don't know this for sure, but it's a possibility. Anyway, then he says, a statute forever. You're going to do this. A way to make this fresh for each generation, to teach it to each, new group of children, etc. Like the church year, again, for us, this is the purpose of the church year, to teach the gospel, to teach the word, to highlight the focus of the scriptures again and again and again to each generation. We find out later, by the way, that the children of Israel, they hardly ever keep the Passover. I think the example is there with Josiah. Is it Josiah or is it Joash? I just forgot. He finds the book of the law and he reads this, how they're supposed to be doing this every year, and they didn't even know about this. They hadn't done it in it's like a super long time. They hadn't kept the Passover. So then they do. Every now and then they keep the Passover. I think we also find this, in like Joshua, right before they come into the promised land. I think it mentions how they keep the Passover. And it may mention that it's been a while since they do it. I can't remember right now. Anyway, Israel often goes through long stretches where they don't do this. And those are also often these stretches when they forget the Lord their God. They forget what he has done. That's so true, so important for us. Each generation of Christians, the faith needs to be ours. And that only happens through the Word. We can't just, like, oh yeah, that's what my parents believe. We got to be in the Word ourselves. We got to teach the Word to our children, and they to their children. And that's the way that the Lord sustains and keeps his church, always, is through the teaching of the Word. And that's why also, I try to emphasize, and I think it's so important, that in a lot of ways, one of the most important forms of mission work is parents teaching the Word to their children. It multiplies its fruits, because not only does this strengthen the church for the next generation, right? When you really teach the Word to your children, give them the Bible stories, like read them a Bible story every night. You cannot overestimate the value of that. Teach them the catechism, teach them the hymns, pray with them, right? This teaches them the faith, and then it prepares them to share the Word with other people as well. Such a big thing. Okay, verses 29 through 32 of chapter 12. At midnight, the Lord struck down all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, from the firstborn of Pharaoh who sat on his throne, to the firstborn of the captive who was in the dungeon, and all the firstborn of the livestock. And Pharaoh rose up in the night, he and all his servants, and all the Egyptians. And there was a great cry in Egypt, for there was not a house where someone was not dead. Then he summoned Moses and Aaron by night and said, Up, go out from among my people, both you and the people of Israel, and go. Serve the Lord as you have said. Take your flocks and your herds as you have said, and be gone, and bless me also. It happens just as God had said, right? And imagine the outcry. Imagine the weeping. Imagine the terror throughout all the land of Egypt when everybody wakes up to find their oldest son dead. And any animals that were left, the firstborn of the animals dies too. And finally, Pharaoh relents. All of you, just go. Doesn't try to bargain anymore. Now, verses 33 to 43. The Egyptians were urgent with the people to send them out of the land in haste, for they said, We shall all be dead. So the people took their dough before it was leavened, their kneading bowls being bound up in their cloaks on their shoulders. The people of Israel had also done as Moses told them, for they had asked the Egyptians for silver and gold jewelry and for clothing. And the Lord had given the people favor in the sight of the Egyptians, so that they let them have what they asked. Thus they plundered the Egyptians. And the people of Israel journeyed from Ramses to Succoth, about 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. A mixed multitude also went up with them, and very much livestock, both flocks and herds. And they baked unleavened cakes of the dough that they had brought out of Egypt, for it was not leavened, because they were thrust out of Egypt and could not wait, nor had they prepared any provisions for themselves. The time that the people of Israel lived in Egypt was 430 years. At the end of 430 years, on that very day, all the hosts of the Lord went out from the land of Egypt. It was a night of watching by the Lord to bring them out of the land of Egypt. So this same night is a night of watching, kept to the Lord by all the people of Israel throughout their generations. This emphasizes the reason they had no leaven was because they didn't have time to wait for the yeast to rise. And this is part of what the Feast of Unleavened Bread is to remind them of, the way that they had to, suddenly leave Egypt because the Lord delivered them. And it mentions how they plunder the Egyptians because they give them all their stuff. They're afraid that they're going to die. Notice this note, it's a night of watching by the Lord, a night of him watching over his people. And so in turn now, the Passover is to be a night of watching. As they observe this Passover, they're to stay up, as Jesus did with his disciples, to eat this feast and to remember and keep the Passover, teaching what God had done. It mentions how many people go out, 600,000 men on foot. So I think that says, let me look at that again quick. Where'd it go? 600,000 men on foot, besides women and children. So I take that to mean 600,000 males who are adults. I'm not sure where the dividing line would be. Maybe at like age 12. But I'm pretty sure it would include all the elderly too. So it's 600,000 men isn't going to be like, these are their fighting men. It's just all the men. And then you have women and children besides. So you're probably talking about, the number of people like throw around is a pretty good guess. It's probably about 2 million, right? Because you're going to have about as many, statistics tell you you're going to have about as many, actually probably a little bit more women than men. So you take 600,000, multiply it by 2, 1.2 million, 1.3 million. And so I think 2 million is probably a pretty conservative estimate. You'd think you're going to have at least as many children again, but probably more, because that's usually the way it goes. If everybody even had just 2 children, and obviously not everybody would, but most of them are going to have more than that. So 2 million is probably a conservative estimate. And then it mentions that there's also a mixed multitude. Apparently some various people, maybe some Egyptians, maybe some people of different ethnicities, who decide to go up with them. There's already Gentiles joining themselves to the children of Israel and going up with them here. That mixed multitude there is going to come up again later in this, not in our story today, but eventually. Okay, let's go on here, 43 through 51. And the Lord said to Moses and Aaron, "This is the statute of the Passover. No foreigner shall eat it, but every slave that is bought for money may eat of it after you have circumcised him. No foreigner or hired worker may eat of it. It shall be eaten in one house. You shall not take any of the flesh outside the house, and you shall not break any of its bones. All the congregation of Israel shall keep it. If a stranger shall sojourn with you and would keep the Passover to the Lord, let all his males be circumcised. Then he may come near and keep it. He shall be as a native of the land, but no uncircumcised person shall eat of it. There shall be one law for the native and one for the stranger who sojourns among you." All the people of Israel did just as the Lord commanded Moses and Aaron, and on that very day the Lord brought the people of Israel out of the land of Egypt by their hosts. Notice only for the Israelites, but then also for anyone who would become an Israelite by circumcision. He's making this distinction, again, between his people and the Gentiles. But he's making a way that the Gentiles can become a part of his people. Notice that circumcision then was a way for anyone to be sealed into the promise of God, very much like baptism. It was to be done automatically to their children, to their babies, who were their baby boys, right? But others who came to faith when older were to be circumcised before eating the Passover. This is the same practice that we have like with baptism and the Lord's Supper, right? Somebody comes and starts taking adult instruction classes, and they've never been baptized. One of the first things that I'm going to suggest is that they should be baptized, and as soon as they're willing to do so, we'll do that. And it's only after they've been baptized and after they've received enough instruction that they would receive the Lord's Supper. So here too, the circumcision is coming before the Passover. And the Bible draws direct lines of comparison between these things, between circumcision and baptism, and between the Passover and the Lord's Supper. It is, of course, the Passover that Jesus is eating when he institutes the Lord's Supper. It's the unleavened bread, and it's the wine that was traditional during the Passover meal. And what will normally happen is this, you have a lamb for each household. And what would happen is when they're having the Passover feast, whoever the head of the household is would explain what the meal means. He would tell the story of the Passover, all these details. And he would talk about the unleavened bread, and he would talk about the bitter herbs. He would talk about, the staff in their hand, etc. So when Jesus says to his disciples, this is my body, this is my blood, he's giving his new teaching on the Passover. This is what it means, he's saying. I'm the lamb. And he's changing it into something new for us. It's also notable, right, when you read that section, it never mentions the lamb. But John talks about how when the day of the Passover would come, the day on which the Passover lamb had to be sacrificed, he's using that to foreshadow Jesus, the Lamb of God. And when Jesus then says, he takes the bread and the wine, if he doesn't pass around the meat, he says the bread and the wine, he says, this is my body, this is my blood, that's the lamb. He's the lamb. And he's giving us himself. Notice how it says here too, don't break any of its bones. This is foreshadowing of Jesus as well, of whom it is said, not one of his bones will be broken. Because they come around and they break the thieves' legs on the cross, but not Jesus's, because he's already dead. And it emphasizes this is to fulfill what was written, not one of his bones shall be broken. Notice a couple other connections here with some New Testament passages. This is from 1 Corinthians 5. Your boasting is not good. He's talking to the Corinthians when they were all boasting about how they had this guy in their midst, in their congregation, who was living with his father's wife, his stepmother, in sin. And they're boasting about this as if this makes them like super like liberal and hip and cool. Because like, look, we know that the gospel means we're free from the law, so this guy can do this. And he says, your boasting is not good. Do you not know that a little leaven leavens the whole lump? Cleanse out the old leaven, that you may be a new lump, as you really are unleavened. For Christ, our Passover lamb, has been sacrificed. Let us therefore celebrate the festival, not with the old leaven, the leaven of malice and evil, but with the unleavened bread of sincerity and truth. And of course, there's John saying, behold the Lamb of God who takes away the sin of the world. And 1 Peter 1, knowing that you were ransomed from the futile ways inherited from your forefathers, not with perishable things such as silver or gold, but with the precious blood of Christ, like that of a lamb without blemish or spot. In Revelation 5, and they sang a new song, saying, you are worthy to take the scroll and to open its seals, for you were slain and have redeemed us to God by your blood out of every tribe and tongue and people and nation. Hebrews 9, 2. How much more shall the blood of Christ, who through the eternal Spirit offered himself without spot to God, cleanse your conscience from dead works to serve the living God? And all of this, the Passover event, shows God's salvation for his people and prefigures that greater work of salvation in sending his Son to give his blood for us. We'll start a little bit of chapter 13 here, just a smidge, and then we'll stop. Because it works good for a stopping point in terms of where the story goes. So I'm going to read verses 1 and 2, and then I'm going to summarize verses 3 to 7, and then I'm going to read some other sections from here. It doesn't all need to be read. The Lord spoke to Moses, consecrate to me all the firstborn. Whatever is the first to open the womb among the people of Israel, both of man and beast, is mine. So Moses tells the people to remember this. It tells them these instructions, reminds them that they're going to this land flowing with milk and honey. It gives them the instructions about unleavened bread and the Passover. Verses 8 through 10, you shall tell your son on that day, it is because of what the Lord did for me when I came out of Egypt. And it shall be to you as a sign on your hand and as a memorial between your eyes, that the law of the Lord may be in your mouth. For with a strong hand the Lord has brought you out of Egypt. You shall therefore keep this statute at its appointed time from year to year. When the Lord brings you into the land of the Canaanites, as he swore to you and your fathers, and shall give it to you, you shall set apart to the Lord all that first opens the womb. All the firstborn of your animals that are males shall be the Lord's. Every firstborn of a donkey you shall redeem with a lamb. Or if you will not redeem it, you shall break its neck. Every firstborn of man among your sons you shall redeem. And when in time to come your son asks you, what does this mean? You shall say to him, by a strong hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt from the house of slavery. For when Pharaoh stubbornly refused to let us go, the Lord killed all the firstborn in the land of Egypt, both the firstborn of man and the firstborn of animals. Therefore I sacrifice to the Lord all the males that first opened the womb, but all the firstborn of my sons I redeem. It shall be as a mark on your hand, or frontlets between your eyes, for by a strong hand the Lord brought us out of Egypt. What he's doing here is explaining part of the sacrificial system. So a lot of the things that are going to be codified pretty soon at Sinai, he's already commanding here and explaining here. This is pivotal with the ceremonial law. All of it is, its purpose is to be a picture of Christ. Circumcision, the Passover, the feasts, these sacrifices. Because notice what's happening. God's saying, all right, I sent the angel of death, and he killed all the firstborn sons in Egypt. But he didn't kill your firstborn sons because of the blood of the Lamb. Now, in order to perpetuate this teaching and to remind you of this and as a picture of Christ throughout your generations, always, not only are you going to keep the Passover, but every time you have a firstborn son, whether it's the firstborn son of your horse or your donkey or of yourself, you have to make a sacrifice. Now, with the animals, you have a choice. You can either say, all right, I've got this horse, and the firstborn son of my horse, and I want to redeem it. I want to keep that horse. Well, then you kill a lamb and sacrifice it for it. But if you don't have that lamb, you don't want to sacrifice a lamb for that horse, you could also break the horse's neck and kill the horse. Your sons, though, don't do that. Don't break your son's neck. You make a sacrifice for your son, and you're going to redeem it. He's saying the exact same way that I redeemed you from Egypt by killing the firstborn sons of Egypt, you are going to redeem your sons back for me. Your firstborn sons are all mine. They belong to me. I bought them. I bought them, God is saying, with the blood of the sons of Egypt. They're mine. So you buy them back from me by sacrificing a lamb or whatever, right? And so it's a lamb for those who can afford a lamb, and for the poor, it's a pair of turtle doves or 2 young pigeons. So that's what's at play. We had this a few weeks ago when Mary and Joseph go to the temple when Jesus is 40 days old, and they have to bring a sacrifice. They bring, 2 young pigeons or 2 turtles or whatever because they're poor. So they're redeeming their son. He's their firstborn son, Mary's firstborn son anyway. And of course, he's also God's only begotten son, the one that he has sent to redeem us all, to buy us back from sin and death and the devil. So we'll stop there for today, and next week we'll pick up with the next part of it, God leading them out and to the Red Sea. So the Lord be with you.